Welcome to episode 241 of the Refuse Fascism podcast, a podcast brought to you by volunteers with Refuse Fascism. I'm Sam Goldman, one of those volunteers and host of the show. Refuse Fascism works to unite all who can be united, to join in mass nonviolent protest and resistance in the streets and throughout society, growing to include millions and refusing to stop until we create such a profound political crisis that Trump cannot impose his fascist program or even maintain his hold on power. I want to thank our patrons and sustainers who make the show possible. Join our community today for as little as $2 a month at patreon.com/refusefascism. Thanks to those sharing the show on social media, through texting friends, through talking about the show, everyone who buys our merch to support and spread the show. We have beanies and t-shirts and stickers. See the show notes to get yours today. And of course, a special thank you to those who help the algorithms that help grow our audience by rating and reviewing the show on Apple Podcasts or their listening platform of choice. They boost the show so much. After listening, please share your thoughts to help others find this resource. In today's show, we're sharing a conversation with Coco, which focuses on the abduction, detention, and planned deportation of Mahmoud Khalil, along with a discussion and then reading of the Refuse Fascism Call to Conscience, a call to act. But first, this week was an escalation and acceleration towards a fascist state with the arrest, detention, and planned deportation of Mahmoud Khalil, and the fascist Trump regime ratcheting up their ethnic cleansing efforts via mass deportation. Dr. Basha Alawi is an H-1B visa holder. She works at Brown Medicine's Division of Kidney Disease and Hypertension and is part of the transplant service at Rhode Island Hospital. She was denied re-entry after visiting her family in Lebanon. A court order that would have delayed the deportation was issued while her plane was on the tarmac, but it took off anyway. According to a Guardian review of the Department of Homeland Security data, U.S. immigration enforcement officials arrested more people last month, February 2025, than in any month over the last 7 years. The New York Times reported on Friday that the Trump regime has drafted a list targeting the citizens of as many as 43 countries as part of a new ban on travel to the United States. Baby jails are back with the agenda of mass detention and deportation. And so I highly recommend you reading Alexandra Villarreal's analysis for The Guardian, linked in the show notes. These are just a few of the many alarming developments, but perhaps the most ominous is that today, Saturday, March 15th, Trump invoked the Alien Enemies Act of 1798. This is a sweeping wartime authority that grants the president the power to target, detain, relocate, and remove both natives and citizens from a designated quote-unquote enemy nation. Trump declared that the Venezuelan street gang Tren de Aragua is actually a quote-unquote hybrid criminal state, equating it to a foreign government, which he claims justifies the rapid deportation of any accused member without due process. He has ordered officials to quote-unquote apprehend, restrain, secure, and remove every migrant aged 14 or older who is deemed part of the gang. It's important to remember that this law is most infamous for its use in the internment of Japanese Americans during World War II. Let's be clear. Under this order, any Venezuelan citizen in the U.S. could be removed under the mere allegation of belonging to this gang without any due process, without any opportunity for defense. Those accused would have no way to contest the claim and would face immediate detention, deportation, and the seizure of all their property by the U.S. authorities. Immigrants are full human beings, not criminals to be demonized, hunted down, terrorized, locked up, and thrown out. Urgently needed. Millions in the streets demanding Trump must go, refusing to allow business as usual when that business is shoving fascist rule down our throats. With that, here's my interview with Coco. Today, I am so glad to be speaking once again with Coco Das. Coco is a fellow member of the Refuse Fascism editorial board, frequent guest and guest host on the podcast, and I'm really glad to welcome Coco back on. And good morning, Coco.
Good morning. It's good to be here.
I wish we had some better things to talk about, but unfortunately, I do want to start with something very heavy. I want to start by talking about the kidnapping and detention of Mahmoud Khalil for listeners to get a better sense of what this represents. You had written a reflection statement on the call to conscience, the call to act. You had written, quote, "Every week the fascist Trump regime is making huge leaps in tearing up the rule of law and civil and democratic rights. With the criminally ominous arrest of Mahmoud Khalil, fascism has advanced to the stage of Gestapo-like kidnappings of activists," end quote. And so I just wanted to give you a moment to walk us through what has happened. Let's start there. What actually did happen? And then we can talk about what it represents.
Yeah, so Mahmoud Khalil is a recent graduate of the Columbia Graduate School of International Affairs and was involved in the protests last year against the bombardment of Gaza and was involved in the very righteous protests at Columbia University and played a role in negotiating between the protesters and the administrators of Columbia. And then on March 8th, I think it's important that Mahmoud is a green card holder. He's married to a U.S. citizen. He's not on a student visa. But on March 8th, he was illegally arrested and threatened with deportation. I don't know if people have seen the video that's circulating. These men are wearing T-shirts. They're in plain clothes. ICE agents refused to identify themselves, basically hauled him away. He is not accused of committing any crime. This is on the whim of Trump and Rubio. It's revenge for, speaking out and criticizing Israel and the US government. And, he was put into an unmarked car, told that he was going to be taken to a federal facility in New York. They did not actually know where he was being held for several days, and he was then transferred to a detention facility, a prison in Louisiana, far from his legal team, his family. The outrages just continue. And then since then, another Palestinian student has been arrested and threatened with deportation. Another student involved in the protests at Columbia was threatened and chose to self-deport, is my understanding. And this is also in the context of Columbia losing $400 million of federal funding for important scientific research. And they're being given certain conditions that they have to meet, including conditions about the Department of Middle Eastern, South Asian Studies. I don't remember the whole name of the department. It's just a very blatant way of further criminalizing protest, severely limiting the rights of people who are legal permanent residents and, expanding the parameters of the attacks on immigrants. There's a lot wrapped up in this, but the main thing is that this is a huge leap. I would venture to say this is the biggest leap that we've seen in terms of them actually moving very quickly to consolidate fascist rule in this country and eviscerate what are supposed to be civil and democratic rights. So that's, in a nutshell, what's happening. There may be things that I left out.
I appreciate the background. Refuse Fascism had put out a flyer to be distributed at actions, at protests, and everywhere this weekend, titled "To All Who Care About Justice, Humanity, and the Future, As Many as One, we demand Mahmoud Khalil must be freed now," stating that the arrest, jailing, and threatened deportation of Columbia University graduate Mahmoud Khalil for lawful speech and lawful action in support of his beliefs must not stand. Going on to say that the arrest of Mahmoud Khalil is a turning point. And I wanted to talk a little bit more about what you were saying in terms of what this represents. How is this a exponential leap and the threat that this poses? We need to be working to free Mahmoud Khalil in his own right, and it is part of a larger onslaught that if we allow this attack to go forward, I feel that we are greenlighting this to happen on a scale that most people can't comprehend. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on that.
I think we really need to look at what they are blatantly saying. Trump and Rubio are blatantly saying, if you speak out against U.S. empire, our rule, what we say is the anti-Semitism, how we define anything, then you are subject to kidnapping. That's what this is saying. And that they don't have to pay any attention to due process or the norms. This is them blatantly stating that this is how they intend to treat political dissidents, people who are even organizing a protest. I think it is also very much on the road to criminalizing protest in general. It's putting a very, very cold chill on the right to dissent in this country. And when you get to a point where who is rounded up is on the whim of the fascist leader, and anything that goes against what they are trying to institute in society as a whole, then you are paving the way for what did happen in Nazi Germany and what could happen on a much worse and bigger scale and much more destructive scale here. They are blatantly throwing out the rule of law, throwing out the norms, throwing out any decency. It's not only with this case, but this case has very serious implications on the right to show any opposition to the fascist consolidation. And if we don't put a line in the sand now here, once it becomes just normal for dissenters, protesters, people who are exercising their right to nonviolent free speech, then the acceleration of this is going to speed up. It's very, very important. This is a really important case. It's a turning point that we cannot ignore. It's a testing ground for them, and it has to be a testing ground for us, the more than half the people of this country who don't want to live in a fascist America.
Can you say a little bit more about what you mean by that, a testing ground for us?
There have been protests. There have been very courageous outpourings. There was the sit-in at Trump Tower by Jewish Voice for Peace. There have been protests on various campuses, including Columbia. This needs to be a watershed moment in U.S. protest history, in the same way that George Floyd was a watershed moment in 2020. Millions of people very quickly need to get mobilized around this, and they need to take a stand. What I mean that it is a testing ground for us is that if we allow this to go down, it's not going to get easier later. If you don't actually stop it with the first really blatant public case and create a situation where society is brought to a halt and they can't get away with it, then I think the words of the Niemöller quote, which I talk about in my appreciation statement about the statement of conscience, the words of the Niemöller quote are washing right over the people living in this country. I think there's something about fascism which is distinctive about fascism from other forms of authoritarianism that people will say sometimes because they don't want to use the word fascism, is I think it really relies a lot on the silence and complicity of the decent people. And if we have to refuse that silence and complicity. So that's what I mean about this being a testing ground. And there is no reason to sit on the fence on this.
I thank you for that. I think that we are seeing this play out in real time. What you don't resist and mobilize to stop, you learn to accept, you become part of. You greenlight the further atrocities. I am not a regular reader of Financial Times, but this piece came across my feed, and Edward Luce had a paragraph that I thought was spot on in the start of his piece. He wrote, quote, "Every American should worry about Mahmoud Khalil, the recent Columbia University graduate who was detained last week by U.S. immigration authorities, though abducted would be a better description. It is no exaggeration to say Khalil's fate is a test of how easily President Donald Trump can slide into lawlessness. To recap, Trump wants to revoke Khalil's green card and support him for demonstrating against Israel during the Columbia University protests," end quote. as you were talking about in terms of this fascist leap and what we mean by fascism, that it is to criminalize any dissent, any opposition to fascist rule. That is extremely ominous. The threatening of the legal rights of all immigrants is extremely ominous. That's what this represents. And the war that this fascist regime is waging against academic freedom, against the universities writ large, is part of that same struggle. There's what you were talking about in terms of what we need to be doing right now, that everybody needs to be uniting across the differences in cause and solutions while being determined and resolute in our refusal that in the name of humanity, we can't and we won't accept a fascist America, and that drive us into the streets right now to demand that Mahmoud Khalil must be freed and to demand the fascist Trump regime must go. But I was also thinking about what the actions of the universities are and what they should be, and if you had any thoughts on that. What we see Columbia and other universities doing right now versus what should be happening.
Yeah, I think the academic freedom point is really important. It's something I neglected to talk about in the importance of this case. But, the irony is that Columbia actually cracked down very hard on its student protesters and did not take a good stand in protecting or even, allowing the right to dissent on their own campus, and bent over backwards to try to accommodate very unprincipled, mendacious cries of anti-Semitism just because people were standing up against the policies of Israel and the US. I think there's a very serious lesson there. You cannot accommodate and find common ground with these fascists except on the terms of the fascists. And the more you try to accommodate, the more it's going to grease the wheels, and it doesn't protect you. The fact that Columbia's lost this funding, even though they have actually really made very serious attempts to crack down on these protests. So I think there's a lesson there for college administrators everywhere. And if they actually really believe in the intellectual mission of higher education of these colleges, then they have to take a stand against fascism. There's no neutral in this. Students, professors, everyone who has playing a very important role in the intellectual life of the country, discovering, debating out what's true. This is a time for complete refusal and noncompliance with fascism. Going along as if this is not the completely illegitimate assault that it is, going along with business as usual, this is not the time for that. These campuses do need to erupt in, mass student walkouts, sit-ins, professors. People are going to have to put something on the line. The Refuse Fascism website, we have a call right now that is saying that over the next 2 weeks, culminating on March 27th, which is the date that is fixed right now for Mahmoud Khalil's hearing, that the resistance has to broaden, deepen, and become more determined. And campuses need to roil with people standing up for Mahmoud Khalil against the collaboration with the Trump fascist regime. These campuses, these colleges, administrators have to stop collaborating. There are very important lessons from Nazi Germany in this as well, and how they see universities as a key component of, you get the universities in line, because universities are places where you'll find more dissenting opinions, more intellectual ferment. You get that in line and you're well along the way of remaking all of society. Everyone involved in university life has to stop collaborating with that goal. We're calling for 2 weeks of growing in numbers and determination, protest, demanding that Mahmoud Khalil must be released, he must be freed, and calling out and saying, in the name of humanity, we refuse to accept a fascist America, recognizing the fascist leap that it is and refusing to let it go down.
Thanks so much, Coco. And we'll link in the show notes to that statement that people should be getting out. And it points to also what it would mean if this does happen, if the campuses do royal with people standing up for Mahmoud Khalil and against collaboration with the Trump fascist regime, with people flooding the public square from all walks of life, and the dynamism that can take place between people in every institution, government and non-government, the universities, but also people in positions in power within the government refusing to cooperate and carry out illegal and illegitimate orders of the Trump fascist regime, and how that gains heart from and adds power to the people in the streets, and the back and forth that can arise from that. And that if people are really putting it on the line for the greater good of freeing Mahmoud Khalil and defeating this fascism, the people in their millions really could become a force powerful enough to defeat Trump and MAGA fascism. And so really encourage people to be taking this statement out online, in real life, everywhere, to free Mahmoud Khalil now and to demand that the fascist Trump regime must go. So I wanted to move on to a couple other things that have taken place this week that underscore this fascist leap that we are seeing, and what the decent people need to be doing in response to it. I wanted to turn to Trump's speech to the Justice Department that he gave yesterday. We're recording on Saturday at the Justice Department headquarters, where he lashed out on lawyers, on former prosecutors, calling them scum, where he made clear his vision of the Justice Department is to contort the vast powers of federal law enforcement to be a tool of unbridled vengeance and retribution. He went on to attack the media, print media, CNN, MSNBC, to attack whole cities like New York, Chicago, DC, to attack really anyone who dares to challenge his rule, and made some really ominous remarks about something that he said before, but he reasserted his desire to have the death penalty for those who involved in drug use and drug trade. So I wanted to get any thoughts that you had on this speech, and really what the stakes are of when he's saying that newspapers are political operatives and it has to be illegal to criticize him. It just can't be legal. Where he's saying that CNN and MSNBC are illegal. What they're doing is illegal. Anything about his remarks and kind of what they represent.
It is another dimension of how blatantly he is putting forward this very idea that to criticize this regime, to criticize the fascist direction, let's be clear, CNN and MSNBC, to the extent that they are critical of Trump, it's pretty mild in terms of what it should be. And to say that even any criticism, any even reporting of the truth of what's happening, it should be illegal. He is very clearly stating what they intend to use these institutions of government to do, and what their idea of justice is, that it's the ability of fascists to do whatever they want to do, and everyone else having their actions criminalized. It's lawlessness for them and fascist rule of law for everyone else. And I haven't looked at the whole speech. I did see some of the headlines, but it needs to be put also in the context of how much Trump is constantly on the offense. Going to Congress to make that Nazi rally speech. I don't even remember when that was. Now going to the DOJ and saying things that are just incredibly outrageous, that go against what any decent people should accept, and stating outright that this is the way it's going to be. Going back, I guess, to the idea of the testing ground, this includes media outlets are going to have to step up their opposition to this, actually, and step up what they're going to put on the line. This lesson, again, of constant accommodation, constant normalizing, It's not going to stop the attacks on them. He does want to shut down CNN and MSNBC and all of these outlets. He does want to shut down these blue cities. He wants to eliminate, just him, but the whole regime wants to eliminate every form of opposition they might encounter in the very radically reactionary fascist form of rule and the vision of society that they are trying to cement into place. And this is the time that people are going to have to stop accommodating and normalizing and accepting it.
I really agree with that, Coco. And I think that we have to shift people from looking up and saying, please, please, leaders in power, resist, to taking action now to change the course of history, because we don't have the time. There is a chance that we can stop this. I just wanted to put that in the mix. Ellie Mistel, writing for The Nation, had written a piece titled "We're Asking the Wrong Questions" about Mahmoud Khalil's arrest. I'm going back to Mahmoud Khalil because it relates to this point that you're getting at. He makes the point that the question should not be, how can the government do this? The only relevant question is, how can we who oppose this fascist regime stop them? The law provides a few answers. The law has always been inadequate in the face of the monopoly of force and a dictator willing to use it. The law will always shift and change to accommodate and appease the men who rule with the guns. And I thought that that was really powerful. He goes on to say that Khalil is now a political prisoner of the United States ruling party. He must be freed. But as Frederick Douglass said, power concedes nothing without a demand. Legal jousting is unlikely to save this man. And it certainly won't save us from Trump's lawlessness and terror, which I'm pointing this out because it applies to the larger situation we're in. Only a popular uprising can defeat the fascist overlords we ourselves have created out of our own bigotry and bile. It ends with, if that doesn't happen, many more of us will be disappeared by Trump's authoritarian regime. Mahmoud Khalil is probably not Trump's first political prisoner. If all we're going to do is wait for the courts to sort it out, he certainly will not be the last. So I'll be linking to that in the show notes too. But I think it powerfully points to the larger situation that this is a part of, and our responsibility and our need to break out of that accommodation and normalization and into visible, relentless resistance, not allowing any of this to come to pass. When journalists are threatened, the DOJ, people are coming out, in mass. When the universities are threatened, the universities shut down in protest. Each of these outrages is met with greater and greater resistance. So I wanted to put that in. I'm not sure if you have any other thoughts that you wanted to share.
Well, I think that it's a very good quote, and important as the legal fight is, on its own, it is not going to be enough to stop what's happening to Mahmoud or stop what they're intending to bring down on, the masses of people. And I think tied to this, protests and, different kinds of resistance and opposition has to really call out the illegitimacy of all this, the illegitimacy of this regime. We make a statement that no election, fair or fraudulent, legitimizes a fascist regime. This is illegitimate. More and more people do need to take up in the protests against these individual sort of outrages and attacks. And overall, this demand that the Trump regime has to go. Trump must go is a very simple demand. And I think that linking to that Frederick Douglass quote, there is an immediate demand here that Mahmoud Khalil must be freed. But he is not going to be the last unless we get his regime out of power and we create a political crisis such that he is not able to implement his plans, including this deportation, and even hold on to power. And this also gives direction to a growing mass movement that actually has a chance to win. Now is the time. The longer that they are able to stay in power, they're going to have the initiative and they're going to have wins.
Such an important point, Coco. Yeah, I think that that's really important for us to keep bringing to life. I was thinking back to the DOJ speech and thinking about how getting people to understand what fascism is and in relation to that, what can and can't work to stop it. I was thinking about how the work that we've done on the show and that you've done in your writing and so forth about getting people to understand that when fascism consolidates, there's no dissent in the streets or in the halls of power. That, the ability to even challenge things through legal challenge is eviscerated. The ability to challenge things through the right to speak out is eliminated. And I think that this speech kind of brought those things together in many ways to me. I wanted to put that in the mix. And I was thinking about the anti-Semitic, heinous ways he speaks about Chuck Schumer, who, let's be clear, is bending over backwards, doing backflips to accommodate, conciliate, and collaborate with the fascist regime. The freedom that he has to do that, and then the freedom that he has to unleash on the masses of people. It gives you a sense of just how outrageous what he's prepared to unleash on the people is. You have the Trump regime moving to enact the Alien Enemies Act, a wartime act giving, unilateral authority to the president to do atrocities. The law was used during the internment of Japanese Americans during World War II. This is the situation. You have him appealing to the Supreme Court for revoking birthright citizenship. You have the reinstitutions of baby jails, the Trump regime embracing family detention yet again. In this and more and worse is all that they promise. And that can be paralyzing, or it can be the moment where we confront it and we say, there is a way to defeat this. We can't stand by. We can't sit this out. We need to act now. And then we do. And so I wanted to move our conversation into Refuse Fascism's call to conscience, a call to act, what it is and how it can be part of changing the terrain and building the mass movement we need to drive this fascist regime from power.
I mean, I think just the example of Chuck Schumer and the point that if this is how they go out after somebody who is actually bending over backwards to accommodate, then imagine what they're going to unleash and what they're already doing to people who are sort of the nameless and faceless right now for the masses of people in the U.S. These people the immigrants that have been rounded up. There's actually absolutely nothing to gain from allowing paralysis to take over. As overwhelming as all this is, I guess, whatever calculations people are making to decide not to act, it's not going to do anything but make all of this worse. What this call to conscience, call to act does is really bring out in it's not a short statement, but actually in a very condensed way, it brings out actually what is at stake, what is the cost to your morality, your humanity, and to the actual future of the people on this planet and life on this planet if we don't act now, if we give in to paralysis and fear, and bringing out to people really what is possible if we do now what history is calling on us to do and what the German people did not do and what we've seen seeds of in 2020 with the uprising against the horrific police murder of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. So grounding people in this refusal to accept a fascist America in the name of humanity and this single demand that really gives us the best chance of actually bringing this fascist trajectory to a halt by driving this regime out of power and giving a very concrete understanding of what this fascism is, what, Trump MAGA fascism is, why it represents the danger to humanity that we're saying it does, and then the picture of how we can actually stop it and the orientation that people need to have with each line that says what this regime is doing. For example, Trump threatens to take over weaker countries and affects a foreign policy that heightens the danger of nuclear war. No, we will not allow this fascist gangster regime to destroy humanity. This is our responsibility. This is what we must not accept. We do not accept their future. And then giving people a picture of what the kind of resistance that is needed and that is possible, because over half of this country viscerally hates what this regime is doing, what Trump represents, and there is a way to defeat this. all the people who are affected by being fired from their jobs. They've, dedicated their lives to service. And now they're being asked to comply with fascist decrees. No compliance, and backed up by people in the streets saying, we stand with you. All the students and young people whose futures are on the line, making campuses hotbeds of resistance. It goes on through all the different sections of society that needs to come together to be a part of this. Millions in the streets, not allowing business as usual when that business is cementing fascist rule. Many voices and bodies demanding the Trump fascist regime must go. If I could, I'm just going to read the very last paragraph of this. Let it not be said that when there was still a chance to stop an unprecedented threat to the future of humanity, we did not rise to meet the challenge of our time. Let us not allow the watching world today to despair of our silence and our failure to act. Instead, let the world see our determination and courage and hear our righteous demand. In the name of humanity, we refuse to accept a fascist America. The fascist Trump regime must go. And this statement getting out to millions and then becoming an inspiration for action, the kind of action that is outlined here, is extremely important right now. And I think the power of this statement should not be underestimated.
So people can go to refusefascism.org and read the statement in full. They can sign it, which everyone should sign it and spread it everywhere. There's a printable version that can be shared. You can share it on social media. There's a video of Coco, you sharing why the statement matters and what difference it could make. That can be shared along with the statement itself. And very quickly, this week, we need thousands of people signing and spreading it. If there's somebody of influence or prominence that you are connected with, bring this statement to them. Have them read it. Have them sign it. Have them spread it on their social media platforms. We need to get this out very widely. People can also donate to get it published so that it can reach even more people. And that can be done at refusefascism.org by hitting the donate button. I don't know if there's anything else before we close our conversation that you wanted to raise or bring up, Coco.
I just think that going back to where we started, that this is a turning point. These next 2 weeks needs to not remain a turning point in the direction of fascist consolidation. It needs to be a turning point in the resistance and refusal to accept this fascist regime and, everything that they have in their sights, with this case of Mahmoud Khalil as the galvanizing case in terms of what the decent people in this country are going to do to stop Trump MAGA fascism.
We're going to put a link to your statement. Is there anything else that you wanted us to link to? Do you want us to share your social media, or how do you want to do that?
I'm not really on the social media that much, but yeah, my Instagram at CocoDas2020.
Thanks so much, Coco.
Thank you.
We'll talk soon. We want to shout out all those who participated in the act of civil disobedience at Trump Tower in New York City with Jewish Voice for Peace, and all who have been in the streets demanding free Mahmoud Khalil now. Next, Mark and I will share Refuse Fascism's new call to conscience, a call to act.
We're proud to share with you a call to conscience, a call to act. No, in the name of humanity, we refuse to accept a fascist America. We demand the Trump fascist regime must go.
Now is the time when we must rise up and act to stop the consolidation of Trump MAGA fascism. For the lives of people here and around the world, we must refuse unlawful and inhumane orders. We must fill the streets and town squares in rising numbers, not stopping until we become millions, not relenting until this regime is no longer able to implement its program.
And the grotesque form of Donald Trump and his vicious conglomeration of Nazi-saluting strategists and shock troops, a fascist regime has come to power. They have learned and hardened from the last 8 years, and they are on an accelerated path to remaking the country in their image. The clock ticks toward the midnight hour. Each minute brings new shocks and jolts. Each second shatters lives. It is unconscionable and dangerous to act as if fascism cannot happen in America. It's unacceptable to conciliate or accommodate in the name of protecting a few when each day the mechanisms of fascism are rapidly being hammered into place, locking in a future that imperils all.
That Trump came to power through an election is no excuse. No election, fair or fraudulent, legitimates fascism. Fascism is not a curse word. Fully imposed, it is a radically oppressive and repressive form of rule over the people of this country, with devastating impact on the people of the world. The rule of law is shredded. Civil and democratic rights are eliminated. Dissent is piece by piece criminalized. The truth is bludgeoned, group after group demonized, and targeted along a trajectory that leads to catastrophe.
Government institutions purged and stocked with MAGA loyalists. Violent vigilante groups, now pardoned. From the halls of power to the streets, fascist foot soldiers are primed and unrestrained to enforce the program of the Trump regime.
No, we refuse to accept a fascist America. This is a fascist regime fighting to make this country even more ruthlessly fueled by white supremacy, where diversity is the enemy, racism is openly the law, and ethnic cleansing is carried out and celebrated.
No, we refuse to live in a society where the fight for equality of all people, no matter their race, gender, sex, nationality, or immigration status, is mocked, vilified, and even forbidden. A fascist regime fighting to make this a country ruled by virulent macho patriarchy, where women are incubators, LGBTQ people are forced back into the closet, and trans people are erased with targets on their backs.
No, we refuse to live in a country where half of humanity are treated as less than human. A fascist regime fighting to make this a country ruled by America First xenophobia, where the hatred of foreigners means terrorizing whole neighborhoods and peoples, tossing millions of immigrants into the shadows and offshore concentration camps, and death through deportation.
No, we respect the dignity and humanity of every person, no matter where they were born. Trump threatens to take over weaker countries and affects a foreign policy that heightens the danger of nuclear war. Never forget that Trump has said, if we have nuclear weapons, why can't we use them?
No, no, no. We will not allow this fascist gangster regime to destroy humanity. All this while a leading core of the regime advances a theocratic Christian supremacy, where the Bible is taken literally and there is no separation between church and state and people's private lives.
No. We know that the right to believe or not to believe is essential to a diverse and thinking people. This is a regime of anti-science lunacy, accelerating climate devastation and fueling more epidemics and pandemics.
No, and again, no. We will fight with all we've got to prevent the destruction of the planet and life on it. We do not accept their future.
The hour has come for each of us to ask, if we do not act to stop this, what kind of people will we become? We stand up and fight for a future in which no human being is enslaved, subjugated, or deemed illegal. A future in which the planet can heal and people can be fit caretakers of the earth. There can be no conciliation or collaboration between the world we want and the country they want. We have no common cause with MAGA fascism. There is a way to defeat this. We, the undersigned, call on the decent people who don't want to live in a fascist America, who are more than half the country, to courageously rise up as one.
Those who have dedicated their lives to service, to teach children, to heal the sick, to conduct life-saving research, refusing to comply with fascist decrees backed up by all justice-loving people. Students and young people whose whole future is on the line, making schools and campuses centers of resistance and filling the streets. Women and LGBTQ people who are furious at being enslaved and erased, bringing their defiance and rage into the public square. People of color and everyone sick to death of white supremacy, refusing to go back, bringing the experience and fury of centuries of resistance into this fight. Artists, writers, clergy, and legal scholars speaking in many voices to say no, bringing their voices into the struggle. With this, millions in the streets not allowing business as usual, when that business is cementing fascist rule with the vilest degrading morality down our throats. Many voices and bodies demanding the Trump fascist regime must go. With this, we can and must create a political crisis in which the Trump regime cannot govern and implement their fascist program or even maintain his hold on power.
Waiting for the next elections will be too late. We cannot rely on the Democratic Party's leadership, who complacently rely on the very norms and processes that the Trump regime shreds by the hour. No, we must organize and struggle as we never have before. We must not allow ourselves to be divided and conquered. We must unite all who can be united from many different viewpoints and perspectives to foster and draw on a collective spirit of courage and righteous fury and willingness to make the necessary sacrifices for the greater good of defeating this fascism. We and our millions are a force powerful enough to defeat Trump MAGA fascism. Let it not be said that when there was still a chance to stop an unprecedented threat to the future of humanity, we did not rise to meet the challenge of our time. Let us not allow the watching world today to despair of our silence and our failure to act. Instead, let the world see our determination and courage and hear our righteous demand. In the name of humanity, we refuse to accept a fascist America. The fascist Trump regime must go.
Read, sign, spread this call to conscience, a call to act at refusefascism.org/act. You can donate towards its publication by making a gift via Venmo at refuse-fascism or by going to refusefascism.org and hitting the donate button. Thanks for listening to Refuse Fascism. Want to support the show? Spread the imperative and support the show by getting merch like t-shirts, beanies, and stickers. See the show notes to get yours today. Or join our Patreon community to fuel refusal of this fascist nightmare. Become a patron today at patreon.com/refusefascism. Or for $0, share the show with others. Rate and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen, or comment on our socials or YouTube. It makes a difference and is so appreciated. Speaking of socials, be sure that you're connected with us at Refuse Fascism just about everywhere, including Blue Sky. And find me on TikTok at Sam Goldman RF. As always, thanks to Richie Marini, Lena Thorne, and Mark Tinkelman for helping produce this episode. Thanks to incredible volunteers, we have transcripts available for each show. So be sure to visit refusefascism.org and sign up to get them in your inbox. Until next Sunday, in the name of humanity, we refuse to accept a fascist America.